The sun was beating down on Palm Beach's pristine streets one Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. Officer Robert Wilson was doing his usual patrol, cruising past the luxury boutiques and swaying palm trees, sipping his lukewarm coffee from the local diner. He'd been on the force for 12 years, and this route had become as familiar as the back of his hand. That's when he spotted it. A sleek black Mercedes with windows tinted just a shade darker than what seemed legal. The car was moving smoothly, perfectly within the speed limit, but something about it made Wilson's radar go up. Maybe it was the way it gleamed too perfectly in the Florida sun, or how it seemed just a little too nice for this part of town, even by Palm Beach standards. He flipped on his lights, and the Mercedes pulled over immediately, smooth and professional, right in front of the old banking building. The driver was clearly no amateur. The car came to a perfect stop, not too close to the curb, not too far. Wilson approached, his hand resting casually on his belt, more from habit than necessity. The window rolled down with a quiet hum, revealing a middle-aged man in an impeccable suit. "Good afternoon, officer," the driver said calmly, hands visible on the steering wheel. He clearly knew the drill. "Is there a problem?" That's when things started to get interesting. The driver, it turned out, was Mr. Chen, who'd been Donald Trump's personal chauffeur for over 5 years. He reached slowly for his credentials, explaining his role while maintaining perfect composure. His license, registration, and special security clearance were all in perfect order, laid out like cards in a winning poker hand. But Officer Wilson wasn't satisfied. Despite the pristine documentation and Mr. Chen's professional demeanor, he insisted on a vehicle search. "Step out of the car, please," he ordered, his tone carrying an edge that made nearby pedestrians slow their pace and watch. "Officer, with all due respect," Mr. Chen replied, his voice steady but concerned, "I'm currently on duty, and this vehicle has proper security clearance. Here's my employer's contact information if you need to verify." Wilson cut him off. "I said, step out of the car." His hand moved from his belt to his radio, a subtle but clear escalation. The gathering crowd of onlookers grew larger, smartphones appearing like fireflies at dusk. What Officer Wilson didn't notice was the small red light blinking on the dashboard, Mr. Chen's security camera capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of the increasingly tense situation. The driver complied with all instructions, maintaining his dignity even as Wilson made him stand in the hot Florida sun while conducting an unnecessarily thorough search of the vehicle. 20 minutes later, having found nothing but immaculately maintained leather seats and a schedule for upcoming security-cleared routes, Wilson grudgingly handed back Mr. Chen's documents. No ticket, no warning, no explanation for the stop. Just a curt nod and a "you can go now." What happened in those 20 minutes would soon spark a firestorm that nobody saw coming. As Mr. Chen drove away, the video footage was already automatically uploading to the security servers at Mar-a-Lago. Within hours, it would reach Donald Trump's personal attention, and the wheels of change would begin turning in ways that would shock everyone involved. The local coffee shop buzzed with whispers as people who witnessed the scene shared what they'd seen. Mrs. Rodriguez, who owned the flower shop across the street, had captured parts of it on her phone. Something wasn't right about how that officer acted, she told her regular customers. That driver was nothing but professional and still. By sunset, social media was already lighting up with different angles of the incident captured by bystanders. The hashtag Palm Beach Stop was starting to trend locally. But nobody, not Officer Wilson, not the gathered crowd, and not even Mr. Chen himself, could have predicted how this routine traffic stop would escalate into a story that would capture national attention and challenge everyone's expectations. As the Mercedes disappeared around the corner, Officer Wilson returned to his patrol car, making a brief note in his log about a routine traffic stop. He had no idea that tomorrow would bring a storm that would change not just his career, but the entire conversation about law enforcement in Palm Beach. The next morning at Mar-a-Lago started like any other. The kitchen staff was preparing breakfast, security teams were changing shifts, and the early Florida sun was painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Donald Trump was in his office, reviewing his schedule for the day when his head of security knocked on the door with an urgent matter. "Sir, you need to see this footage from yesterday," the security chief said, tablet in hand. Trump looked up from his papers, noticed the serious expression on his security chief's face, and gestured for him to continue. The dashboard camera footage played out on the screen, crystal clear and deafening. Every moment of the encounter was captured in high definition: the unnecessary stop, Officer Wilson's aggressive tone, Mr. Chen's professional demeanor, the prolonged search. Trump's expression darkened as he watched, particularly when the camera caught clear audio of the officer's dismissive responses to his driver's valid credentials. "Get me the police chief on the phone," Trump said, his voice carrying that tone his staff knew meant business. "And where's Chen? Is he here?" Mr. Chen was in the staff area, preparing for the day's duties when he was called to the main office. He entered looking composed as always, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. He hadn't mentioned the incident, thinking it better to just move on. After all, such encounters weren't exactly rare in his experience. "Why didn't you tell me about this yesterday?" Trump asked, turning the tablet so Mr. Chen could see the frozen image of Officer Wilson on the screen. "Sir, I didn't want to cause any trouble," Mr. Chen replied quietly. "These things happen sometimes." "Not to my staff, they don't," Trump responded, already dialing the Palm Beach Police Department's number. "Not anymore." Within an hour, Police Chief Thompson was sitting in Trump's office, watching the footage for himself. His face grew increasingly troubled as the video played out. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about Officer Wilson," the chief admitted after the video ended. "But it's the first time we've had such clear evidence." "I want action," Trump said firmly. "Not just paperwork, not just warnings, real action." He pointed to Mr. Chen, who was still standing quietly by the door. "This man has worked for me for 5 years. He has top-level security clearance. He drives my family. And your officer treated him like a criminal because what? The car looked too nice." The police chief shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We'll conduct a full investigation." "No," Trump interrupted. "You'll do more than that. I want a complete review of every complaint against this officer, every traffic stop, every incident, and I want it done transparently." Word of the meeting spread through Palm Beach like wildfire. The local news vans started appearing outside the police department by noon. Officer Wilson, who had just started his shift, was called back to the station. The looks he got from his colleagues told him something was very wrong. In the police station's break room, officers gathered around the TV watching as the story broke. The dashboard camera footage was playing on every local channel, alongside interviews with witnesses from the scene. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop was shown saying, "I saw the whole thing." That officer was out of line, plain and simple. Social media exploded with the story. The local hashtag Palm Beach Stop hashtag went national. Videos taken by bystanders were being shared thousands of times. News crews descended on Palm Beach, setting up their equipment along the pristine streets where just yesterday, Officer Wilson had made his fateful traffic stop. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Mr. Chen was trying to go about his normal duties, but everyone wanted to talk to him. The other staff members shared their own stories of similar encounters. The head chef talked about his nephew's experiences. The groundskeeper had stories too. What had started as one incident was quickly becoming something much bigger. Trump spent the afternoon in meetings with community leaders and police officials. His phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from news outlets wanting statements. But he was focused on one thing: making sure this incident led to real change. As the sun set on that second day, Officer Wilson sat alone in the police station's conference room, waiting to hear his fate. The dashboard camera footage played on a loop on the TV behind him, showing his mistakes for all to see. Outside, a crowd had gathered, not with anger or protests, but with a quiet determination to see justice served. The story was far from over, but already things were happening that would change Palm Beach forever. And tomorrow would bring even more surprises that nobody saw coming. Day 3 brought a storm of revelations that nobody in Palm Beach was prepared for. As promised, the police department launched a full investigation into Officer Wilson's past conduct, but what they found sent shockwaves through the entire community. The investigation team, working through the night, had pulled every traffic stop record, every complaint, and every bodycam footage from Wilson's 12 years on the force. They set up in the department's largest conference room, walls covered with documents and timelines. What emerged was a pattern that couldn't be ignored. "Look at these numbers," one investigator said, pointing to a stack of reports. "In the past 5 years alone, there have been 28 complaints about similar stops, all involving expensive cars driven by people of color, all dismissed due to lack of evidence." The police chief sat at his desk, rubbing his temples as he read through the reports. Each page seemed worse than the last. There were stories of businessmen in suits being made to sit on curbs, doctors in luxury cars being questioned about how they could afford their vehicles, and successful professionals being treated like suspects for simply driving nice cars in nice neighborhoods. Meanwhile, at Mar-a-Lago, Trump was meeting with his legal team. The dashboard camera footage from Mr. Chen's car had been sent to experts for analysis. They confirmed what everyone could see. There had been no valid reason for the stop. No traffic violation, no suspicious behavior, nothing except a luxury car with a driver who didn't fit Officer Wilson's preconceptions. "The problem isn't just Wilson," Trump told his advisors. "It's the system that let this go on for so long. How many complaints were swept under the rug? How many people were too afraid to even file complaints?" The local community was already responding. Outside the police station, a steady stream of people came forward to share their own stories. A successful business owner described being stopped 3 times in 1 month. A doctor talked about how he started driving an old car to avoid being pulled over on his way to emergency calls. Each story added another piece to the puzzle. The mayor called an emergency town council meeting. The usual quiet chamber was packed, with people spilling out into the hallways. Local business owners, community leaders, and concerned citizens all wanted to be heard. The meeting, scheduled for 1 hour, stretched to 4 as speaker after speaker stood up to share their experiences. Back at the police station, Officer Wilson's locker was being searched. His fellow officers watched in silence as Internal Affairs went through his records. They found handwritten notes about which cars he thought looked suspicious in which neighborhoods. There were comments about certain people in certain vehicles that made his colleagues uncomfortable. The media coverage intensified. National news networks picked up the story, sending reporters to Palm Beach. They set up their cameras along Worth Avenue, interviewing locals and visitors alike. The story was no longer just about one traffic stop, it had become about something much bigger. Mr. Chen, still trying to maintain his normal routine, found himself at the center of it all. Other drivers and service workers started approaching him, thanking him for accidentally bringing this issue to light. "Your stop was the tipping point," one hotel valet told him. "We've all been through it, but nobody had proof like your dashboard camera." By late afternoon, the police chief called another press conference. The investigation had uncovered enough evidence to take action, but he knew this announcement would change lives forever. As he adjusted his tie and prepared to face the cameras, he could hear the crowd gathering outside. "This isn't just about one officer anymore," he practiced saying to his empty office. "This is about making sure every person who drives through Palm Beach is treated with the same respect, regardless of what car they're driving or who they appear to be." The sun was setting over Palm Beach as reporters and community members gathered for the press conference. Nobody knew exactly what was coming, but everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. The investigation had uncovered things that couldn't be ignored, and now it was time for action. As the police chief walked to the podium, cameras flashing and microphones ready, the whole city seemed to hold its breath. What he was about to announce would send ripples far beyond Palm Beach, touching police departments and communities across the country. And still, this was just the beginning of a story that would keep surprising everyone involved. The press conference room was packed shoulder to shoulder. News cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like stars in the night. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of bodies and equipment, making the room feel even more tense than it already was. The police chief approached the podium, adjusting his collar against the sweat beading at his neck. Behind him, a large screen displayed graphs and statistics from the investigation. He cleared his throat, tapped the microphone once, and began. "Good evening. 3 days ago, a routine traffic stop in our city sparked an investigation that has uncovered disturbing patterns within our department." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "What we found was not just one incident, but a systemic issue that demands immediate action." Suddenly, a stir went through the crowd as Donald Trump himself walked into the room. Nobody had expected him to attend. He took a position at the side of the stage, his presence adding even more weight to the moment. The police chief continued, his voice growing stronger. Our investigation has revealed that Officer Wilson conducted over 300 questionable stops in the past 5 years. The data shows a clear pattern of profiling based on vehicle type and driver appearance. Gasps filled the room as the statistics appeared on the screen behind him. Charts showed the disproportionate numbers. Maps displayed the concentration of stops in certain neighborhoods. The evidence was overwhelming. Effective immediately, Officer Wilson has been terminated from his position with the Palm Beach Police Department. The chief's words hung in the air for a moment before the room erupted in murmurs and camera clicks. But he wasn't finished. Additionally, we are implementing a complete overhaul of our training and oversight procedures. Every traffic stop will now be reviewed. Body cameras will be mandatory. And most importantly, we're establishing a civilian review board to ensure transparency. Trump stepped forward then, taking the podium. The room fell silent. What happened to my driver could have happened to anyone, he said, his voice firm. But it shouldn't happen to anybody, not in Palm Beach, not anywhere. In the back of the room, Mr. Chen stood quietly, still processing how his routine drive had led to this moment. Next to him, the flower shop owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, patted his arm supportively. They'd both become unexpected symbols of a change nobody saw coming. Outside the police station, crowds had gathered to watch the press conference on large screens set up in the parking lot. When the announcement of Wilson's termination came, there was no cheering, no celebration, just a collective sigh of relief and determination for real change. Back inside, reporters' hands shot up with questions. What about other officers? Will there be more investigations? Mr. Trump, why did you get personally involved? The police chief held up his hands. This is just the beginning, he assured them. We're reviewing every complaint filed in the past decade. We're bringing in external consultants to evaluate our procedures. This isn't about one officer or one incident anymore. This is about making sure our department serves everyone equally. Trump added his own thoughts, speaking without notes. When I saw that video, I didn't see a security issue or a political issue. I saw a human issue. And sometimes it takes seeing something happen to someone you know to realize it's happening to people you don't know every single day. The questions continued for another hour. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the windows, the chief outlined specific changes, new training programs, community oversight committees, regular audits of traffic stop data. Each announcement felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of something new. Officer Wilson, watching the press conference from his lawyer's office, sat in stunned silence. His 12-year career was over, but more than that, he was becoming the face of a problem much bigger than himself. As the press conference wound down, Mr. Chen tried to slip out quietly, but reporters caught up with him in the parking lot. I just want to do my job, he told them simply. But if what happened to me helps make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else, then something good came from it. The evening news would lead with the story across the country. Social media lit up with discussions about police reform and accountability. But in Palm Beach, as the crowd dispersed and the camera crews packed up their equipment, people were already talking about what would come next. Because everyone knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much bigger, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and surprises that no one could predict. The morning after the press conference dawned with a different energy in Palm Beach. Local coffee shops buzzed with conversation about the changes announced the previous evening. Phone lines at the police department rang constantly with people wanting to share their own stories. The quiet beach town had become the center of a national conversation about change. At the police station, officers arrived for their morning briefing to find new faces in the room. A team of training specialists sat at the back, laptops open, ready to begin the department's transformation. The police chief stood at the front, looking tired but determined. Starting today, everything changes, he announced to the room. Every traffic stop will be reviewed. Every complaint will be investigated. And most importantly, we're going to learn from our mistakes. The morning's first training session started with a simple exercise. Officers watched the dashboard camera footage from Mr. Chen's stop, but this time with a difference. They had to write down what should have been done differently at each step. The room was quiet except for the scratch of pens on paper. Meanwhile, at Mar-a-Lago, Mr. Chen arrived for work as usual, though nothing felt usual anymore. Other staff members greeted him differently, not with pity, but with a new kind of respect. He'd become more than just Trump's driver. He'd become a symbol of change. Trump called him into the office mid-morning. "The police department wants you to speak at their training sessions," he said. "You don't have to if you don't want to, but your story could help make real change happen." Mr. Chen thought about it. He'd never wanted attention. He just wanted to do his job. But as he looked out the window at the Palm Beach streets where it all happened, he realized sometimes change needs a face, a story, a real person to make it matter. "I'll do it," he said quietly, "if it helps." Back at the police station, the changes were already visible. New cameras were being installed in every patrol car. Officers sat in cultural sensitivity training sessions, learning about unconscious bias and how to recognize it. The mood was serious but hopeful. The local community was getting involved too. The newly formed Civilian Review Board held its first meeting in the town hall. People from all walks of life, business owners, teachers, retirees, sat together, ready to play their part in making sure their police department served everyone fairly. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop was there, still determined to make a difference. "We're not here to point fingers," she told the group. "We're here to make sure our community works for everyone." By afternoon, news crews were filming as officers practiced new protocols for traffic stops. Each step was carefully planned and reviewed. When do you ask for ID? How do you approach the vehicle? What words do you use? The trainers went through every detail. The police chief sat in his office, looking at the growing pile of complaints that people felt safe to file now. Each one represented someone who hadn't felt hurt before. Each one was a chance to do better. "We can't change the past," he told a reporter who'd asked for an update. "But we can definitely change the future. Every officer in this department is learning that respect isn't just about following rules, it's about seeing the humanity in every person we serve." Social media continued to buzz with updates from Palm Beach. Videos of the new training sessions went viral. People shared their own stories of times they'd been unfairly profiled, but now with hope that things could change. As evening approached, Mr. Chen drove Trump to a community meeting. The streets felt different now. Officers on patrol waved respectfully at the car instead of eyeing it suspiciously. Small changes, but meaningful ones. The meeting was held in a local church, packed with people wanting to be part of the solution. When Mr. Chen walked in, the room fell quiet for a moment, then erupted in gentle applause. He hadn't asked to be a hero, but sometimes heroes are just regular people who find themselves in the right place at the right time to make a difference. The day ended with a sunset meeting of the police department's new leadership team. They sat around a conference table covered in training manuals and policy drafts, planning the next steps. On the wall, they'd hung a simple sign: "Protect and serve. Everyone, every time." As night fell over Palm Beach, the changes were just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, and new opportunities to prove that real change was possible. And nobody, from the highest-ranking officer to the newest recruit, wanted to go back to the way things were before. 1 month after the incident that changed Palm Beach, the signs of transformation were everywhere. The police department's new training program was in full swing, and word was spreading to other cities about the Palm Beach model of police reform. The morning sun reflected off the new cameras installed in every patrol car as officers gathered for their daily briefing. The mood in the room was different now, more open, more thoughtful. Today's session would be special. Mr. Chen had finally agreed to share his story with the entire force. He stood at the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back, looking at the faces of officers who might have once pulled him over without cause. "I've been driving for important people for 15 years, he began softly. "I've always followed every rule, kept every document perfect, maintained every vehicle in top condition. But none of that mattered that day." The room was silent as he described how it felt to be treated like a suspect for doing his job. No anger in his voice, just honest truth. Some officers looked down at their notepads, others nodded in understanding. This wasn't about blame anymore, it was about learning. Meanwhile, across town, the former Officer Wilson was doing some learning of his own. After his termination, he'd started working with a local community center, meeting people he might have once pulled over without cause. Today, he was helping a youth group organize a car show that would bring police and car enthusiasts together. I had to lose everything to see what I was doing wrong, he told the local reporter who'd come to cover the event. Now I'm trying to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. At Mar-a-Lago, Trump was meeting with police chiefs from other cities who'd come to see the changes for themselves. The conference room was filled with law enforcement leaders eager to learn how they could implement similar reforms in their own departments. It's not just about new rules, the Palm Beach police chief explained to his colleagues. It's about changing how we think about our job. Every traffic stop, every interaction is a chance to either build trust or break it. The numbers were already showing improvement. Traffic stops were down, but actual arrests for serious crimes were up. Community tips had increased significantly. People felt more comfortable talking to officers, sharing information, being part of the solution. Mrs. Rodriguez's flower shop had become an unofficial community meeting spot. Today, she was hosting a coffee morning where residents and officers could chat informally. The shop was full of conversation and laughter, police cars parked next to luxury vehicles outside. 6 weeks ago, seeing a patrol car in my mirror would make my heart race, one businessman told an officer over coffee. Now I actually wave when I see you guys. That's what real change feels like. The Civilian Review Board was making a difference too. They'd set up a simple system for reporting concerns about traffic stops. Every complaint was reviewed, every incident investigated. But more importantly, they were seeing fewer complaints because officers were handling stops differently. In the afternoon, a training session demonstrated the new approach. 2 officers practiced a traffic stop while others watched and critiqued. Remember, the trainer said, your goal isn't to find something wrong. Your goal is to ensure safety and respect the rights of every driver. Mr. Chen's dashboard camera footage had become a teaching tool shown in police academies across the state. But now it was paired with footage of the right way to handle stops, respectful interactions, clear communication, no assumptions made based on vehicles or drivers. The local high school had gotten involved too. Students in the auto shop program were organizing a car show where they could show off their projects without fear of being hassled. Officers would be there not to watch them, but to admire their work and learn about car culture. As evening approached, the police chief sat in his office reviewing the day's reports. A knock at his door revealed a young officer with an idea. What if we did workshops where car enthusiasts could teach us about their vehicles? Help us understand what we're actually looking at during stops. The chief smiled. A month ago, such a suggestion might have been dismissed. Now, it was exactly the kind of thinking they needed. The sun set over Palm Beach, casting long shadows across streets that felt different now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to prove that change wasn't just possible, it was already happening. At the end of his shift, Mr. Chen parked the Mercedes in its usual spot at Mar-a-Lago. As he walked to his own car, he passed a patrol car. The officer inside gave him a respectful nod. Small gestures, but they meant everything. This was how real change looked, one interaction, one moment, one person at a time. 1 year after the traffic stop that changed everything, Palm Beach had become a different place. The morning sun rose over a city that had turned a moment of controversy into a movement for positive change. The police department was hosting an anniversary event at the local community center. The parking lot was filled with an unusual mix: patrol cars parked next to modified sports cars, luxury vehicles beside everyday family sit-ins. Inside, officers and community members mingled freely, sharing stories and coffee. Mr. Chen stood near the entrance, watching people arrive. He'd become something of a local legend, though he still felt uncomfortable with the attention. A group of young car enthusiasts waved at him as they walked in, their restored vehicles gleaming in the morning light. "Hard to believe it's been a year," the police chief said, joining him at the door. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." The department's statistics told a powerful story. Traffic stops were down by 60%, but community trust was up. Crime-solving rates had improved because people felt comfortable talking to officers. The Palm Beach model was being studied by police departments across the country. Inside the community center, photos lined the walls showing the year's transformation. There was the original press conference, the first training sessions, community meetings, and car shows. Each image captured a step in the journey from conflict to collaboration. The former Officer Wilson was there too, now working as a community liaison. He'd spent the year speaking at police academies about his experience, turning his mistake into a lesson others could learn from. "I lost my badge," he often said, "but I found my purpose." Trump arrived mid-morning, taking time to talk with everyone. He stopped at a display showing the dashboard camera footage that started it all, now part of a larger exhibit about positive change. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments," he told a group of reporters. "We could have just fired one officer and moved on. Instead, we decided to change the whole system." The Civilian Review Board had its own booth, showing how community oversight had made a difference. They'd handled hundreds of cases over the year, but more importantly, they'd helped build bridges between police and residents. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop was there with her photo album of the year's events. Her shop had remained a meeting place where officers and residents could talk informally. "Real change happens over coffee and conversation," she liked to say. At noon, everyone gathered for the main presentation. The police chief took the stage, but instead of giving a speech, he played a video. It showed dash cam footage from recent traffic stops, officers being respectful, explaining their actions, treating every driver with dignity. "This is what progress looks like," he said simply. "Not perfect, but better every day." Mr. Chen hadn't planned to speak, but when Trump called him to the stage, he decided it was time. He looked out at the crowd, officers, community members, car enthusiasts, local leaders, all waiting to hear from the man whose experience had sparked such change. "A year ago, I was just trying to do my job," he began. "Now I realize sometimes doing your job means being part of something bigger than yourself. What happened to me wasn't unique. What's unique is what we all did about it." The afternoon turned into a celebration of community. Kids got to sit in patrol cars, officers learned about engine modifications from car enthusiasts, and everyone shared stories about how things had changed. As the sun began to set, the police chief made one final announcement. The department was launching a new program where car enthusiasts would help train officers about different types of vehicles. Knowledge replacing suspicion, understanding replacing fear. The former Officer Wilson stood at the back, watching it all. A year ago, he'd been the face of the problem. Now he was part of the solution, proof that people could learn and change. The evening ended with a parade of cars down Palm Beach's Main Street, police vehicles and luxury cars, sports cars and family sit-ins, all driving together. No suspicious looks, no unnecessary stops, just a community that had learned to see beyond stereotypes. Mr. Chen drove Trump home in the same Mercedes that had been stopped a year ago. As they passed the spot where it all happened, Trump spoke quietly. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes." The stars came out over Palm Beach, shining down on a city that had shown how real change was possible. The story that had started with one traffic stop had become something much bigger. A reminder that when people come together, even the biggest problems can be solved, one small step at a time.